My son pushed the chair away from me. Not pulled. Pushed. Like I was dirt on his shoe. My chest tightened. Ears ringing. Fingers went ice cold around the folder. Daniel told me to stand. Just stand there. While they sat at my dead sister's table. The folder trembled in my hands. Papers I'd kept for 3 years. Papers that would change everything. They thought I'd brought nothing. They were wrong. Dead wrong. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I stood in that doorway holding my sister's future in a burgundy folder. 3 years since Lillian moved in with me. 1 month since she passed away. 15 years since we'd signed the papers they'd forgotten about. Papers they'd never known existed. My boys stood like guards in front of the mahogany table. Gregory in his sharp suit. Daniel fidgeting with his tie. Both of them blocking me like I was some stranger off the street. Not their mother. Not the woman who'd raised them. A stranger. Gregory spoke first. His voice smooth as glass. Cold as winter. He said I didn't belong there. Said it was for immediate family only. Immediate family. I remembered Gregory at age 10. Begging me not to leave him alone at night. Clinging to my nightgown when thunder scared him. Now he couldn't even look me in the eye. Daniel chimed in. Softer voice but the same knife. He said they'd explain later. Told me not to make a scene. I remembered Daniel at 7. Crying when kids at school called him stupid. Me spending hours teaching him to read. Believing in him when no one else would. Now he treated me like an embarrassment. I gripped that folder tighter. The corners cut into my palms. Good. I wanted to feel something sharp. Something real. The law office smelled like leather and lies. Old books and older money. Light came through tall windows. Cast long shadows on the polished floor. I thought about Lillian, my little sister. How she'd lived independently until 62. Traveled the world. Never married. Never had children. How dementia crept in like a thief. Stealing words. Stealing memories. Stealing the brilliant woman I'd always admired. When her mind started slipping she came to me. Not to Gregory. Not to Daniel. To me. I cooked her favorite soups. Read her poetry until she fell asleep. Watched her fade piece by piece. But she had clear moments. Sharp moments. One evening 15 years ago, when we were both still healthy, she grabbed my hand. Her eyes focused like headlights cutting through fog. She said people change when money gets involved. Said we needed to protect each other. Write it down. Make it legal. So we did. A mutual will. Witnessed. Notarized. Binding as rope. Everything she owned would come to me if she died first. Everything I owned would go to her if I died first. No matter what anyone else wanted. No matter what anyone else tried. Back then it seemed like insurance. Protection against an uncertain future. Now it was justice. The boys didn't know about those papers. Nobody knew except the lawyers and witnesses. And anyone smart enough to look. But my sons weren't looking. They were counting. Dividing. Planning. They saw Lillian's house. Her savings. Her beautiful old furniture. They saw inheritance like birthday cake. Ready to slice up and serve themselves. They forgot one thing. Lillian had chosen me. 15 years ago. 3 years of care had only confirmed what she already knew. I wasn't just surviving this moment. I was winning it. Mr. Callahan walked in adjusting his glasses. He looked tired. Old lawyers always look tired. Like they've seen too much greed for one lifetime. He glanced at me standing there. Looked at my boys sitting pretty. His eyebrows went up just slightly. Professional surprise. I stepped forward, handed him the folder, watched his face as he opened it. Read the first page, then the second. His expression changed. Not shock. Recognition. The look a man gets when puzzle pieces click into place. He asked if I wanted him to announce it right away. I shook my head. Let them hear it during the reading. Let them sit there comfortable and confident while their world shifted beneath them. For the first time in years I felt steady. Solid. Like I was standing on bedrock instead of shifting sand. Gregory kept glancing at his phone. Daniel drummed his fingers on the table. They looked bored, impatient, ready to get their money and leave. Leave me behind. Again. I thought about Daniel pawning my wedding ring 2 years ago. To cover a gambling debt. I got it back weeks later. Scratched and dulled, like our relationship. I thought about Gregory missing my 70th birthday. Too busy with a business meeting. A meeting that earned him nothing. Cost me everything. The reading began. Callahan's voice filled the room. Legal language. Formal words. Then he got to the important part. He read Lillian's will. The recent will. The fake will. The one that gave everything to her beloved nephews. Gregory smiled. Actually smiled. Like he'd won something he'd worked for. Daniel nodded. Satisfied. Entitled. Like kings claiming their throne. Then Callahan cleared his throat. Said there was another document. An earlier document. One that changed everything. He read my sister's real wishes. Her true will. The one we'd signed together 15 years ago on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Everything to me. The house. The land. The savings account. The furniture. The jewelry. Everything. Gregory's face went white. Then red. Then purple. Like a bruise forming in fast motion. Daniel's mouth fell open like a broken door. Stayed open. Fish gasping for air. They started talking at once. Gregory demanding legal explanations. Daniel claiming it wasn't fair. Both voices climbing over each other like children fighting over toys. But it was legal. Perfectly legal. Signed and sealed and witnessed. Callahan ignored their noise. Asked me quietly if I had any questions. I shook my head. I'd known this moment was coming. I'd been ready for 3 years. My boys stormed out. Gregory first. Efficient in his anger. Daniel following. Emotional in his betrayal. Neither said goodbye. Neither looked back. Left me sitting there with the lawyer and the truth. I walked home alone. The house felt different. Quieter. Not empty quiet. Victory quiet. I made tea with steady hands. Not fear shaking. Relief shaking. The kind that comes when you finally stop carrying weight that was never yours to carry. I thought about Michael, my husband. Gone 20 years now. Heart attack in his sleep. Quick and clean like he'd want it. I thought about the boys after he died. How fast they turned practical. Who gets the car? Who pays the bills? Who takes care of mom? Nobody wanted that last job. So I took care of myself. And I took care of Lillian. And now I'd take care of what she left behind. My sons would call. They'd visit. They'd apologize and explain and promise. But I was done with their promises. Done with their excuses. Done being their safety net while they treated me like their burden. I opened my sister's will one more time. Read her words in her careful handwriting. This money is for someone who showed up. Someone who stayed. I showed up. I stayed. Finally, it was my turn. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Lillian came to me on a Tuesday. I set down my coffee cup. Watched her through the kitchen window. October. leaves falling like tears outside. She stood on my porch holding one small suitcase. Blue leather, worn at the corners. Everything she thought she'd need for the rest of her life. The doctor had given her the news 3 weeks before. Early onset dementia. Progressive. Irreversible. I walked to the front door. Turned the sticky lock. Pulled her into my arms. We stood there holding each other. Two sisters who'd never needed words to understand grief. She moved into my guest room. The one with yellow wallpaper and morning light. Hung her dresses in the closet. Arranged her books on the nightstand. Made herself at home like she'd always belonged there. Maybe she did. I poured fresh coffee. We sat at my kitchen table like we had as children. Same positions. Same comfortable silence. But everything was different now. Death had entered the room. Sat down uninvited. Made itself at home. We were always close. Even as children. Even when life pulled us in different directions. She went to college. I got married. She traveled the world. I raised babies. She wrote letters from Paris. I wrote grocery lists in Ohio. But we stayed connected. Sisters do that. Blood calls to blood. I folded laundry while she talked. Listened to her plans, her fears, her determination to face what was coming with dignity. The dementia crept in slowly at first. Little things, lost keys, forgotten names, words that disappeared mid-sentence like smoke. I watched her struggle with simple tasks. Buttoning shirts, making coffee, remembering which day it was. But she had good moments too. Clear moments. Times when her mind snapped back into focus like a camera lens adjusting. Those were the moments I treasured. One evening we sat on the porch drinking iced tea. Summer was ending. Crickets sang in the grass. Street lamps flickered on one by one. I was mending a torn dish towel. Simple task. Familiar motions. Lillian looked at me with eyes that suddenly knew everything again. She said she'd been thinking. About the future. About what happens when people die. About money and family and how things change. She said she'd seen it before. How relatives circle like vultures when someone gets sick. How they start making plans before the person is even gone. I set down my needle. Looked at her directly. She was right. We'd both seen it happen. Friends who died and left behind fighting families. Children who showed up for funerals but not for birthdays. Love that lasted only as long as the inheritance. Lillian reached over and took my hand. Her fingers felt thin, fragile, like bird bones wrapped in paper. She told me she trusted me. Only me. Said I was the one who showed up when she needed help. The one who didn't ask questions or keep score. But she hesitated, worried about being unfair to my boys. Worried about causing family problems. Worried about asking too much. I squeezed her hand. Told her family means showing up. Means being present when presence matters. My sons visited sometimes. Gregory brought flowers. Daniel brought groceries. They were polite, helpful. Present for an hour at a time. But I saw them watching. Calculating. Wondering how long it would last. Wondering what it would cost me. What it would leave for them. They were good boys. Raised right. But money makes people different. Even good people. Lillian wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of. Wanted to put it in writing. Make it official. But she wanted me to be certain. To think about the consequences. To understand what choosing her might cost me. I didn't need to think. Had been thinking for weeks without realizing it. We drove to the lawyer's office the next morning. Mr. Patterson on Maple Street. Old man with kind eyes and gentle hands. He explained mutual wills, how they worked, how they protected people who loved each other. Everything Lillian owned would come to me. Everything I owned would go to her. Whoever lived longer would inherit it all. Simple, clean, fair. Lillian signed first. Her signature still strong and clear. Still the same handwriting I remembered from childhood birthday cards. I signed next. My hands steady, certain. This wasn't just legal protection. It was a promise. A covenant between sisters who understood what love meant. The witnesses signed. The notary stamped. The papers went into the file. It was done. We drove home in comfortable silence. Lillian stared out the window at the changing leaves. I focused on the road ahead. That night she cooked dinner. Spaghetti with meat sauce. Her specialty. The recipe she'd learned in Italy 20 years before. She moved around my kitchen like she belonged there. Like she'd always belonged there. We ate by candlelight. Talked about everything and nothing. Remembered stories from childhood. Laughed until our sides hurt. It felt like old times. Before sickness. Before worry. Before time started running out. The months that followed weren't easy. Lillian's condition got worse. Slowly. Steadily. Like water wearing away stone. I helped her dress when buttons became mysteries. Read to her when words grew slippery. Held her hand when confusion clouded her eyes. I never complained. Never got frustrated. Never made her feel like a burden. Because she wasn't a burden. She was my sister. She was family. The boys visited less as she got worse. Found excuses. Had commitments. Seemed uncomfortable with decline. But Emily started coming around. My cousin's granddaughter. 25. Worked at the library. She brought fresh bread. Read poetry aloud. Sat with Lillian when I needed breaks. Never asked for anything. Never expected recognition. Just showed up. Like family should. Lillian died on a Sunday morning in March. Peaceful. Quiet. Like she just decided to stop fighting. I held her hand as she slipped away. Whispered that I loved her. Promised I'd honor what we'd built together. She couldn't answer. But I think she heard me. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The will reading was scheduled for 2 o'clock on a Thursday. I arrived early. Sat in my car watching my sons arrive in their expensive cars. Gregory's black BMW. Daniel's silver Mercedes. Both cars newer than anything I'd ever owned. Both bought with money they'd borrowed from me and never repaid. I walked into the building carrying my burgundy folder. The same folder I'd kept in my bedroom dresser for 3 years. Hidden beneath my winter sweaters. Waiting for this moment. The receptionist smiled. Asked if I needed anything. Water. Coffee. A chair. I told her I was fine. I'd been fine for a long time. Learning to be fine when nobody else cared. The conference room smelled like old wood and fresh fear. My sons sat at the long table. Confident. Comfortable. Ready to collect. They didn't acknowledge me when I walked in. I was just the old woman who'd raised them. The old woman who didn't matter anymore. Mr. Callahan entered exactly at 2. Punctual man. Professional. He'd been handling family business for 30 years. He knew secrets. Kept them locked away like treasures. Callahan opened his briefcase. Pulled out a thick folder. Started reading the standard language. Legal words that meant money was about to change hands. My sons leaned forward. Eager. Hungry. Callahan read Lillian's recent will. The one Gregory and Daniel expected to hear. The one that left everything to her beloved nephews in equal shares. Gregory smiled. Actually smiled. cold satisfaction spreading across his face. He glanced at Daniel. Shared victory before victory was won. Daniel nodded, more emotional in his relief. Eyes bright with tears of gratitude. Performance tears. Calculated grief. They thought it was over. Thought they could divide up their aunt's life and drive home to their expensive cars. Then Callahan cleared his throat. He said there was another document. An earlier document. A legally binding document that superseded everything else. The room went quiet. Different quiet. Tense quiet. Gregory leaned forward. Sharp intelligence in his eyes. Already calculating. Already looking for legal loopholes. Ways to contest. Ways to fight. Daniel looked confused. More emotional. Less strategic. The one who felt betrayed rather than outmaneuvered. Callahan looked at me. Asked if I was ready. I nodded once. Sharp. Final. He opened my folder. The one I'd been carrying. The one with papers signed 15 years ago. Mutual will. Witnessed. Notarized. Legal. Everything Lillian owned now belonged to me. The house on Elm Street. The savings account. The investments. The jewelry. The furniture. Everything. Gregory's reaction was immediate. Clinical anger. He demanded to see the original documents. Started questioning dates. Witnesses. Legal procedures. His lawyer training showed. Even in shock, he was building a case. Looking for weaknesses. Planning his attack. Daniel's response was different. More personal. More hurt. He asked why Lillian hadn't told them. Why she'd kept secrets. Why she'd chosen me over family. Over family. Like he'd been family to her. Like grocery store visits once a month counted as relationship. Callahan kept reading. Professional. Calm. Like he delivered shocking news every day. Maybe he did. The house was worth $300,000. The savings account held another $150,000. The investment portfolio was worth $200,000 more. $650,000. Gone from my son's grasping hands. Gone to the woman who'd actually taken care of their aunt. Gregory found his voice first. Started demanding explanations. Not emotional explanations. Legal ones. He wanted documentation. Proof of Lillian's mental capacity. Evidence the will was properly executed. Already thinking like a lawyer. Already planning to contest. Daniel joined in with different tactics. Emotional manipulation. He said there must be a mistake. Said Aunt Lillian loved them. Said she wouldn't have cut them out. But she had cut them out. We'd cut them out together. Two women who understood what family really meant. Callahan ignored their protests. Asked me if I had any questions about the will. About my inheritance. About what came next. I shook my head. I'd had 15 years to think about this possibility. 3 years to prepare for this reality. Gregory stood up. Started pacing. His expensive shoes clicking on the polished floor. Click, click, click. Like a countdown timer. He demanded to see the original documents. Wanted proof they were legitimate. Proof they were witnessed properly. Proof Lillian was competent when she signed. Callahan opened another folder. Pulled out copies of everything. Signatures. Dates. Notary stamps. Medical records from that time showing Lillian's perfect mental health. All legal. All binding. All final. Daniel asked why Lillian hadn't told them. Why she'd kept it secret. Why she'd chosen me over her own nephews. I could have answered. Could have explained about showing up. About staying. About love that doesn't keep score. Could have mentioned the 15 years of visits they'd missed. The holidays they'd skipped. The phone calls they'd never made. But I didn't speak. Didn't need to. The papers spoke for themselves. Gregory turned to me then. Really looked at me for the first time in years. His eyes were hard, analytical, already seeing me as an opponent rather than his mother. He asked what I planned to do with the money. Whether I'd share it. Whether I remembered who my real family was. Real family. I remembered changing his diapers. Teaching him to tie his shoes. Staying up all night when he had pneumonia at age 7. Real family. I remembered him missing Christmas dinner 3 years running. Too busy with work. Too important for family traditions. Real family works both ways. Love flows in both directions. Care goes where it's needed. My sons had forgotten that lesson. If they'd ever learned it at all. Callahan started packing up his papers. The reading was over. The inheritance was settled. The law had spoken. Gregory left first. Efficient even in defeat. Already planning his next move. Already calculating odds and legal strategies. Daniel lingered. Looked back at me with something that might have been regret. Or might have been performance. Hard to tell the difference anymore. The door closed behind them. Left me alone with Callahan and the truth. He asked if I was all right. If I understood what had just happened. If I was prepared for what came next. I told him I was fine. Better than fine. For the first time in years I felt like myself again. The woman who'd worked 2 jobs to support her family. The woman who'd saved every penny for her children's education. The woman who'd been strong enough to survive her husband's death. Strong enough to care for her dying sister. Strong enough to stand up for herself when nobody else would. Callahan smiled then. A real smile. Not professional courtesy. Genuine warmth. He said Lillian would be proud. Said she'd made the right choice. Said justice had been served. I thanked him. Shook his hand. Walked out into the afternoon sunlight. The parking lot was empty. My son's expensive cars were gone. They'd driven away without waiting. Without trying to understand. Without caring about anything but money they'd lost. I sat in my old Honda. 15 years old. Reliable. Paid for. I thought about Lillian. How she'd trusted me with her final wishes. How she'd known I'd keep my promises. I thought about my sons. How they'd become men I didn't recognize. How money had changed them into strangers. How they'd chosen greed over love. How they'd revealed their true nature when they thought inheritance was at stake. I thought about the house I'd inherit. The money that would finally be mine. The future I could finally plan. Not for them. Not anymore. For me. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I drove home to silence. Not comfortable silence. Hollow silence. The kind that presses against your eardrums like deep water. I turned off the engine. Sat in my driveway looking at the house that had been home for 43 years. White paint peeling near the gutters. Front porch sagging slightly on the left side. Oil stain on the concrete from cars long dead. Home since Michael and I were newlyweds. Since we believed in forever. I got out of the car. Walked to the front door. The key stuck in the lock like it always did. Had to jiggle it just right. Push the door with my shoulder while turning the handle. Michael used to say he'd fix that lock. Someday. When he had time. Someday never came for Michael. I stepped inside. Closed the door behind me. The house felt different. Charged. Changed. Living room where Michael used to read his evening paper. Kitchen where Lillian and I drank morning coffee during her final months. I made tea I couldn't drink. Sat at the kitchen table where I'd sat 10,000 times before. Dining room where my sons once did homework. Complained about teachers. Argued over who got the last piece of pie. All empty now. All echoing with ghosts. The afternoon light came through the window above the sink. Same light that had warmed this room for 4 decades. But everything felt different now. Victory felt different than I'd expected. Heavier. More complex. I owned Lillian's house now. Her money. Her future. For the first time since Michael died, I had choices. Real choices. Not just survival. I walked through my quiet house. Really looked at it. Really saw it. The walls needed painting. The carpet needed replacing. The windows let in drafts. All things Michael had promised to fix. All things I'd learned to live with. But I didn't have to live with them anymore. I had means now. I had options. I had power. The phone rang. Gregory. I let it ring. Let him hear my silence. Then Daniel called. Same result. Same silence from me. They wanted explanations. Wanted to negotiate. Wanted me to fix what they saw as a mistake. But this wasn't a mistake. This was consequence. This was justice. This was love finally finding its proper home. I thought about all the times I'd rescued them. All the money I'd given. All the debts I'd covered. But not just money. Specific betrayals that cut deeper than financial loss. Daniel pawning my engagement ring to cover a poker debt. Getting it back weeks later, scratched and dulled. The diamond loose in its setting. Like our relationship. Gregory missing my 70th birthday party. The one Emily had helped me plan. Empty chair at the head table. Cake for 49 guests. He called 3 days later. Business meeting had run long. Very important client. Very sorry. Not sorry enough to remember the next year. Or the year after that. I sat in my empty kitchen counting costs. Adding up years of being used. Of loving people who only took. Of giving without receiving. The silence pressed against my ears. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of possibilities I'd forgotten existed. I could sell Lillian's house. Take the money and travel. See places I'd only read about in magazines. I could keep both houses. Have choices. Have options. Have security. I could give the money away. To charities. To people who might actually appreciate it. I could do anything I wanted. For the first time in decades. The late afternoon sun slanted across my kitchen floor. Golden light that made everything look softer. More forgiving. I remembered Michael sitting in that light 20 years ago. Reading his paper. Drinking his coffee. Planning weekends we'd never have. I remembered my boys as children. Sticky fingers. Grass-stained knees. Believing their mother could fix anything. When did they stop believing that? When did I become a problem instead of a person? When did love become obligation instead of choice? The phone rang again. Different ring. House phone instead of cell phone. I answered this time. Curious. Emily. My cousin's granddaughter. The girl who'd been visiting regularly. Who'd helped with Lillian. Who'd never asked for anything in return. She'd heard about the will reading through family gossip. Wanted to know if I was all right. If I needed company. Not money. Not explanations. Not negotiations. Just company. I told her I was fine. Told her she could come by if she wanted. Told her I had tea and stories to share. She said she'd bring dinner. Said she'd been experimenting with chicken soup. Said she'd like to hear whatever I wanted to tell her. After I hung up, I realized something. The silence in my house wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. Waiting for new voices. New stories. New life. The boys would call again. Would visit. Would try to change my mind with lawyers and guilt and manufactured family loyalty. But I was done being changed. Done being managed. Done being grateful for scraps of attention from people who should have loved me unconditionally. I made fresh tea. Drank it this time. Tasted sweetness I'd forgotten was possible. Outside my kitchen window the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Beautiful ending to a day that changed everything. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow would be mine. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The phone calls started Friday morning. Gregory first. 7:30. Before I'd finished my coffee. Before I'd even gotten dressed. I let him talk. Let him use words like fairness and family and future. Let him paint himself as the victim. But his approach was different from what I'd expected. More calculated. More strategic. He didn't cry or plead. He analyzed. Built a case. Presented logical arguments for why the inheritance should be shared. Talked about Aunt Lillian's true intentions. About family unity. About what father would have wanted. What father would have wanted. Michael would have wanted his sons to visit their mother more than twice a year. Would have wanted them to call without needing money. Would have wanted them to remember birthdays and holidays. Michael would have been ashamed of what they'd become. Gregory's voice got harder toward the end. Less pleading. More threatening. He talked about legal options. About contesting the will. About proving Lillian wasn't competent. I hung up without saying goodbye. Let the dial tone be my answer. Daniel called an hour later. Different approach. Same desperation. He cried on the phone. Actually cried. Said he was sorry for everything. Sorry for taking my money. Sorry for not paying me back. Sorry for being a disappointment. But his tears felt practiced. Performance grief. The kind actors use to win awards. He'd made a list. Every dollar I'd ever given him. Every loan. Every bailout. Every emergency check. $93,000 over 20 years. Almost my entire retirement savings. He wanted to pay it back. All of it. With interest. But his voice shook when he said it. We both knew he didn't have that kind of money. Would never have that kind of money. His gambling problem wasn't solved. Just better hidden. He asked if we could work something out. Some kind of payment plan. Some way to make things right between us. Too little. Too late. Too convenient. I told him if he really wanted to make things right he wouldn't contest the will. Wouldn't hire lawyers. Wouldn't try to take what Lillian had left me. The crying stopped then. Just like that. Like someone had flipped a switch. He said he'd think about it. Said he'd call back. He never did. The weekend brought visitors. Gregory Saturday morning. Daniel Sunday afternoon. Both of them showing up unannounced. Both of them trying different tactics. Gregory brought flowers. Daisies from the grocery store. Still in their plastic wrapper. Price tag still attached. He sat at my kitchen table like he used to as a boy. But his eyes were different now. Calculating. Cold. He talked about family unity. About doing what's best for everyone. About compromise. Then he did something that surprised me. He quoted his father. Used Michael's words to try to guilt me into sharing. He said Dad always believed family should stick together. Should share good fortune. Should put blood before everything else. But he got the quote wrong. Changed the words to suit his purpose. I remembered the real conversation. Michael talking about family responsibility. About earning love through actions. About blood meaning nothing without behavior. I told Gregory he was misremembering. Told him his father would be disappointed in how he'd turned out. His mask slipped then. Just for a moment. I saw the anger underneath. The cold calculation. The sense of entitlement that had been growing for years. He suggested splitting Lillian's estate 3 ways. Equal shares. Fair and square. Fair and square. Nothing about the years I'd cared for Lillian. Nothing about the midnight confusion. Nothing about the doctor visits. The medications. The slow decline. Nothing about love. Everything about money. I served him coffee in the same cup he'd used as a child. Blue ceramic with a chip on the handle. He didn't notice. Didn't remember. Just like he'd forgotten everything else that mattered. Daniel's visit was different. More theatrical. More desperate. He brought his wife. His children. My grandchildren I barely saw anymore. The kids looked uncomfortable. Embarrassed. Like they'd been coached to smile and be charming. Like they were props in their father's performance. Daniel talked about family traditions. About keeping things in the family. About what their grandfather would have wanted. But then he made a mistake. Started talking about lawyers. About contesting the will. About proving Lillian wasn't in her right mind when she signed it. In front of his children. In front of my grandchildren. Teaching them that family loyalty meant whatever served their interests. The grandchildren played in my backyard while we talked. Ran around the old swing set Michael had built 30 years ago. For a moment I remembered what family was supposed to feel like. What it used to feel like. Then Daniel's mask slipped too. He asked outright for my help fighting the will. Asked me to testify that Lillian was confused. That she didn't understand what she was signing. Asked me to lie under oath. To betray my sister's memory. To help them steal what she'd freely given. I told them all to leave. Told Daniel I was disappointed in him. Told him his father would have been ashamed. They left without arguing. Without fighting. Without trying to change my mind. Just gathered up their things and walked away. Like they'd never really been there at all. Monday brought something different. Something I hadn't expected. Emily showed up with fresh bread and worried eyes. She'd heard about the weekend visits through neighborhood gossip. The phone calls. The threats about lawyers. She asked if I was all right. If I needed anything. If there was something she could do to help. Not money. Not inheritance. Not negotiations. Just help. I made tea. We sat in my living room. Talked about everything and nothing. Like we always did. But this time was different. This time I really looked at her. Really saw her. Emily was 25. Worked at the library. Lived in a small apartment with more books than furniture. She visited because she wanted to. Not because she had to. Not because she expected anything in return. Just because she cared. She told me stories about the library. About the old men who came in every day to read newspapers. About the children who discovered new books. But she was nervous too. I could see it. The way she fumbled with her teacup. The way she asked careful questions about how I was handling everything. She was worried about me. But also worried about something else. Something she couldn't quite name. We talked until the sun started setting. Until the light in my living room turned golden and soft. When Emily left, she hugged me. A real hug. Not the polite embrace my sons gave me on holidays. A hug that said I mattered. That I was valued. That I wasn't alone. But I could see her processing everything. The family conflict. The money. The way people change when inheritance is involved. She was learning what I'd learned too late. That love and money don't mix well. That family loyalty has limits. That sometimes the people who aren't related to you are the ones who care about you most. After she left, I sat in my quiet house thinking about choices, about consequences, about what really matters in the end. My sons had made their choices, had shown me who they really were, had proven that blood doesn't always mean family. But Emily had shown me something else. That family can be chosen. That love doesn't have to be inherited. That sometimes the people who show up are more important than the people who share your DNA. The phone rang. Gregory again. I didn't answer. Let it ring. Let him hear my silence. Let him understand that some bridges burn completely. That some words can't be taken back. Some actions can't be undone. That some mothers finally learn to say no. I went to bed that night with something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. Real clarity. The kind that comes from finally seeing people as they really are. From finally understanding that love should be earned, not assumed. From finally learning the difference between family and relatives. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Wednesday morning I drove to Mr. Callahan's office. Not because my sons had called. Not because anyone had pressured me. Because I'd made a decision. A decision that had been growing in my mind like a seed finding sunlight. I parked in the same spot I'd used for the will reading. Walked through the same doors. But everything felt different now. I was no longer the dismissed mother clutching a folder. I was a woman with power. With choices. With the ability to shape her own legacy. The receptionist remembered me, smiled warmly, asked how I was adjusting to my new circumstances. New circumstances. Like inheriting money was just another life change. Like winning the lottery or moving to Florida. She didn't understand. This wasn't about money. Never had been. This was about being chosen. Being valued. Being seen. Mr. Callahan greeted me in his office. Same tired eyes. Same gentle manner. But something had changed in how he looked at me. Respect. That's what was different. The respect that comes with power. With money. With the ability to make decisions that matter. I told him I wanted to create a trust. Wanted to put legal protections around my estate. Wanted to make sure my final wishes would be honored. Just like Lillian had done. Just like she'd taught me to do. Callahan leaned back in his leather chair. Asked who I had in mind as beneficiary. The answer came easily. Had been forming for weeks without my realizing it. Emily Rhodes. My cousin's granddaughter. The girl who showed up with fresh bread and genuine smiles. But then I hesitated. My pen hovered above the page. These were still my children, once. The babies I'd nursed. The boys I'd raised. The men who'd forgotten where they came from. 25 years old. Library assistant. More books than furniture in her apartment. More kindness in her heart than my sons had ever shown. Callahan made notes. Asked about Emily's relationship to me. Her circumstances. Her character. I told him about the visits every 2 weeks. About the homemade bread. About conversations that lasted hours because neither of us was watching the clock. About someone who asked for nothing and gave everything. But I was honest too. About her limitations. Her naivety. The way she sometimes panicked when given responsibility. The way she'd looked overwhelmed when I'd mentioned family conflicts. Like she was seeing the ugly side of money for the first time. Callahan nodded. Understanding. Professional but warm. He asked about the trust structure. About conditions and restrictions. About what would happen if Emily proved unworthy. I told him she wouldn't prove unworthy. Couldn't. Because she'd already proven the opposite. Had been proving it for 3 years running. But I wanted legal protections anyway. Wanted ironclad language. Wanted my wishes carved in stone. We discussed details, percentages, time frames, legal requirements. Most of my estate would go to Emily. The house, the savings, Lillian's inheritance, everything I'd worked for and everything I'd been given. But I wanted one more thing. Something Callahan called a disinheritance clause. If either of my sons contested my will after my death, they would receive nothing. Not one penny. Not one piece of furniture. Not one family photograph. Nothing. The lawyer's eyebrows went up. He asked if I was certain. If I understood the finality of such a decision. My pen hovered again. This was permanent. Irreversible. The final severing of bonds that had already been broken. I thought about Gregory's cold calculation. Daniel's manipulative tears. Their willingness to lie under oath to get what they wanted. Their complete inability to understand what they'd lost. What they'd thrown away. I told Callahan I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. My sons had shown me who they were. Had revealed their true nature when they thought money was at stake. They'd chosen greed over love. Chosen inheritance over relationship. Chosen what they could take over what they could give. I was done rewarding their choices. Done enabling their selfishness. Done hoping they'd change. Some people don't change. Some people can't. Some people won't. My sons were all three. Callahan drafted the documents. Legal language that would protect Emily and punish anyone who tried to take what I'd given her. I signed my name with steady hands. Watched the notary stamp each page. Felt the weight of finality settling around me like a warm coat. It was done. Emily would inherit everything. My sons would inherit consequences. Exactly as it should be. I drove home through streets I'd traveled for 40 years. Past houses where I'd known the neighbors. Past schools where my boys had learned to read. Past the church where Michael and I had married. Where we'd baptized our children. Where we'd buried our dreams of growing old together. All of it looked the same. But I felt different. Lighter. Like I'd been carrying a heavy load and finally set it down. That evening Emily came by with soup. Homemade chicken noodle. Still warm from her stove. The smell filled my kitchen with comfort. We sat at my kitchen table eating together. She talked about books she'd discovered at the library. About an old man who came in every day to read travel magazines. About places he'd never been but dreamed of seeing. She asked about my day. Not probing. Not demanding. Just caring. But I could see the worry in her eyes. The way she kept glancing at me. Checking to make sure I was all right. She'd heard the family gossip. Knew about the conflicts. The threats. The lawyers. I told her I'd been to see Mr. Callahan. Had made some changes to my estate planning. Had ensured my final wishes would be respected. She nodded. Asked if there was anything she could do to help. Any paperwork to organize. Any decisions to make. Not what she might inherit. Not what it might mean for her future. Just how she could help me in the present. That was Emily. Always thinking of others. Always putting needs before wants. Always giving more than she received. But she was learning too. I could see it. The way money changed everything it touched. The way families turned toxic when inheritance was involved. The way love became conditional when cash was at stake. After dinner we sat in the living room. She read aloud from a book of poetry. Elizabeth Bishop. Adrienne Rich. Mary Oliver. Voices of women who'd found their strength. Who'd spoken their truth. Who'd refused to be silenced. The words filled my quiet house with music. With meaning. With hope. When Emily left that night, she hugged me goodbye. Same warm embrace she always gave. But different too. Tighter. More protective. Like she was trying to shield me from whatever was coming. She had no idea her life had changed forever. Had no idea what waited for her in the future. Didn't matter. She'd earned it through the present. Through showing up. Through staying. Through caring without expecting anything in return. I locked the door behind her. Made tea. Sat at my kitchen table thinking about legacy. About what we leave behind when we're gone. About how we're remembered. About what matters in the end. My sons would remember me as the mother who disappointed them. Who kept them from their inheritance. Who chose someone else over family. But Emily would remember me differently. As the old woman who told stories. Who made tea and listened to problems. Who saw her value before anyone else did. Who believed in her. Who trusted her. Who loved her like family. Better than family. Because this love was chosen. Earned. Real. The phone rang. Daniel. I didn't answer. Didn't need to hear his voice anymore. Didn't need his apologies or explanations or promises. I'd heard enough. Seen enough. Forgiven enough. Some bridges are meant to burn. Some relationships are meant to end. Some doors are meant to close forever. And some new doors are meant to open. Some new relationships are meant to begin. Some new love is meant to flourish. I'd closed one chapter of my life today. Had ended the story of disappointing sons and enabling mother. But I'd opened another chapter too. Had begun the story of chosen family and earned love. Of recognition and respect and reciprocated caring. Of finally getting what I deserved. Of finally giving love where it would be appreciated. Of finally understanding that blood doesn't make family. Behavior does. Character does. Consistency does. Emily had all three. My sons had none. The choice was easy. Had always been easy. I just needed time to see it clearly. Time to stop hoping things would change. Time to start accepting things as they were. Time to choose love over obligation. Time to choose worthiness over biology. Time to choose family that chose me back. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. 3 months later, Gregory served me with papers. Legal documents. Court summons. Words printed on expensive letterhead that meant war. I read them at my kitchen table. Same table where I'd signed my own will. Where I'd made tea for Lillian during her final months. Where I'd fed my boys breakfast before school for 18 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Gregory was contesting Lillian's will. Claiming she was mentally incompetent when she signed it. Claiming I had influenced her unfairly. Claiming I had stolen what belonged to him. His petition was thorough. Professional. Written by lawyers who charged more per hour than I'd made in a week. Money he'd borrowed. Money he didn't have. Money he was betting on winning. Daniel joined the lawsuit 2 weeks later. Separate lawyer. Same desperation. Different strategy. Where Gregory was cold and calculating, Daniel was emotional and manipulative. His petition painted me as a scheming sister who'd taken advantage of a confused woman. Both of them claiming they loved their aunt. Both of them claiming I'd manipulated a sick woman. Both of them forgetting who'd actually taken care of her. Mr. Callahan called me when the papers were filed. His voice was grim, professional concern mixed with personal anger. He asked if I was prepared for what was coming. Asked if I needed emotional support. I told him I'd been preparing for this moment for months. Had been expecting it since the will reading. Had been ready for it my entire adult life. He said we had a strong case. The mutual will was legally sound. Properly witnessed. Properly executed. But he warned me about the emotional cost. About having to prove my sister's mental capacity in public. About defending our relationship against their lies. About watching my sons try to destroy my reputation to get their money. I told him I understood. Told him to fight as hard as necessary. Told him money wasn't the point anymore. Dignity was the point. Truth was the point. Justice was the point. The depositions began in January. Cold morning. Gray sky. Courthouse that smelled like fear and disappointment. Gregory went first. Sat across from me at a long table. Wouldn't meet my eyes. His lawyer asked questions about Lillian's condition. About her memory problems. About her capacity to make decisions. Gregory answered like he'd been coached. Clinical. Precise. Emotionless. He said Aunt Lillian was confused in her final years. Said she didn't understand what she was signing. Said I'd isolated her from family. Poisoned her mind against them. Taken advantage of her vulnerability. All lies. But delivered with professional confidence. With legal authority. With the assumption that repetition creates truth. I watched my son lie under oath. Watched him betray everything we'd taught him about honesty and integrity. Watched him become someone I didn't recognize. Someone I'd never raised. Someone who'd forgotten where he came from. My turn came next. Same table. Same cold room. Same lawyer trying to trap me with clever words. But I'd lived through this story. Had seen it unfold day by day. Had nothing to hide and no reason to lie. I told them about Lillian moving in. About her good days and bad days. About the evening she asked me to help her plan for the future. About the clarity in her eyes when she signed the will. About the strength in her voice when she said she trusted me. About the months that followed. The care I gave. The love I showed. The promises I kept. The lawyer pushed harder. Asked about my motivations. About what I gained from the arrangement. About whether I'd suggested the mutual will. I told the truth. Said Lillian had suggested it. Said she was protecting both of us. Said she understood what family really meant. Said some family is born. Some family is chosen. Some family is earned through years of showing up. Daniel's deposition was different. More emotional. More desperate. He cried again. Real tears this time. But angry tears. Betrayed tears. The tears of someone who'd expected inheritance and gotten consequences instead. He painted a picture of a beloved aunt who'd been systematically separated from her family. Who'd been brainwashed. Who'd been stolen. His lawyer asked the same questions. Got the same fabricated answers. Built the same weak case based on lies and wishful thinking. But under cross-examination the truth emerged. The years of neglect. The forgotten birthdays. The missed holidays. The phone calls asking for money. The visits that lasted only as long as necessary. The love that existed only when it might pay dividends. Neither of my sons had spent significant time with Lillian in her final years. Neither had witnessed her mental state firsthand. Neither had been there when it mattered. When she was afraid. When she was confused. When she needed family most. But they expected to benefit from her death anyway. Expected to profit from her love. Expected to inherit what they'd never earned. The trial date was set for April. Spring cleaning. New beginnings. Flowers pushing through winter soil. Perfect timing for truth to emerge from lies. I spent the waiting months preparing. Gathering evidence. Organizing memories. Building a case built on love instead of greed. Callahan subpoenaed medical records. Lillian's doctors testified about her mental capacity during the relevant time period. About her clear moments. About her ability to make informed decisions. We gathered witnesses. Friends who'd visited. Neighbors who'd seen us together. People who understood what real care looked like. What real family looked like. Emily helped me organize documents. Spent evenings at my kitchen table sorting through papers and photographs. Evidence of a life well lived and well remembered. She never asked about the lawsuit details. Never pried into family business. Just offered quiet support when I needed it most. Just showed up, like always, like family should. But I could see the strain on her. The way she worried about me. The way she watched for signs of stress or exhaustion. She was learning what it cost to choose love over blood. What it meant to stand up for what's right. What it felt like to be targeted by people who saw kindness as weakness. The trial began on a Monday. Bright April morning. Courthouse steps crowded with people pursuing justice. Or pursuing money disguised as justice. Gregory and Daniel sat at the plaintiff's table. Expensive suits. Nervous energy. Lawyers whispering strategy and encouragement. I sat with Callahan at the defendant's table. Calm. Prepared. Ready to defend what was mine by right and love. The judge was older than I expected. Gray hair. Kind eyes. The look of someone who'd seen every kind of human greed and family dysfunction. Someone who knew the difference between law and justice. Between what's legal and what's right. Gregory's lawyer spoke first. Painted a picture of a confused old woman manipulated by her scheming sister. Claimed Lillian had been too sick to understand what she was signing. Claimed I'd isolated her from family. Poisoned her mind. Stolen her legacy. All lies. But presented with professional confidence. With legal authority. With impressive visual aids and emotional appeals. Callahan's opening was different. Quieter. More factual. More honest. He talked about love. About sacrifice. About showing up when others walked away. About a woman who'd honored her promises. Who'd earned what she inherited. Who'd been chosen by someone who knew her worth. The witnesses came next. Doctors. Neighbors. Friends. People who'd seen Lillian in her final years. All of them testified to her mental clarity. Her decision-making ability. Her deep love for the sister who'd cared for her. Her anger at nephews who visited only when convenient. Who called only when they needed something. Who treated her like an obligation instead of family. Gregory testified on his own behalf. Spoke about childhood memories. About loving his aunt. About believing he deserved her inheritance. But under cross-examination the truth emerged. The years of neglect. The forgotten birthdays. The missed holidays. The phone calls asking for money. The visits that lasted only as long as necessary. The love that existed only when it might pay dividends. Daniel's testimony was worse. More emotional. More desperate. More obviously false. He claimed to have visited regularly. Claimed to have helped with Lillian's care. Claimed to have been her favorite nephew. Callahan destroyed him with evidence. Hospital records showing who'd signed forms. Medical appointments I'd attended alone. Emergency contacts listing only my name. The truth in black and white. Documented. Undeniable. After 3 days of testimony, the judge called for closing arguments. Gregory's lawyer made one final plea. Appealed to family loyalty. To traditional inheritance patterns. To the idea that blood trumps behavior. That being related means more than being present. That DNA matters more than devotion. Callahan spoke last. Spoke simply. Spoke truly. He said inheritance should follow love. Should reward loyalty. Should honor those who honor others. He said Lillian had made her choice with a clear mind and full heart. Had chosen wisely. Had chosen well. Had chosen me. The judge retired to consider her verdict. Left us waiting in the hallway outside. Sons on one side. Mother on the other. Family divided by greed. By disappointment. By choices that couldn't be undone. 20 minutes later she returned. Called us back into the courtroom. Looked at Gregory and Daniel with something approaching pity. Then she spoke. Her voice clear. Her words final. The court finds sufficient evidence of the decedent's mental capacity and clear intent. The mutual will executed 15 years prior is valid and binding. The plaintiff's motion is denied. Motion dismissed. Will stands. Case closed. Justice served. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I walked out of that courthouse into spring sunlight. Clean light. Honest light. The kind that shows everything exactly as it is. My sons didn't follow me. Didn't speak to me. Didn't look back as they walked to their expensive cars with their expensive lawyers. Cars bought with borrowed money. Money they'd never repaid. Money that would never be theirs now. The disinheritance clause had been triggered. Their decision to contest the will had cost them everything. Exactly as I'd planned. Exactly as they'd deserved. I drove home slowly. Windows down. Fresh air filling my lungs like hope. For the first time in months I felt light. Unburdened. Free. The phone was ringing when I unlocked my front door. Gregory. I let it ring. Let his anger echo in my empty hallway. Then Daniel called. Same result. Same silence from me. I'd said everything I needed to say in that courtroom. Under oath. On the record. In front of God and a federal judge. The truth had won. Finally. Completely. Permanently. That evening I sat at my kitchen table with pen and paper. Old-fashioned tools for an old-fashioned task. Writing a letter. By hand. The way my mother had taught me 60 years ago. Dear Emily. 2 words that held a lifetime of gratitude. I wrote slowly. Carefully. Choosing each word like selecting precious stones. Each sentence carrying weight I wanted her to understand. I told her about the trust. About the will. About the future I'd planned for her. Not as a gift. As recognition. For showing up. For staying. For giving without asking. For loving without counting the cost. I told her about family. Real family. The kind that chooses you back. The kind that earns its place in your heart through consistency and care. I told her about my sons. About disappointment that runs deeper than grief. About love that learned too late to have boundaries. About the difference between enabling and loving. Between helping and harming. Between giving from strength and giving from weakness. But I also told her about responsibility. About what it means to be chosen. About the weight that comes with trust. About understanding that being loved is a privilege that requires care. I sealed the envelope. Placed it on the mantel next to Lillian's photograph. 2 women who'd found each other when they needed family most. Who'd created family from scratch. From choice. From daily acts of showing up. Tuesday afternoon Emily came by with fresh scones. Blueberry. Still warm from her oven. Wrapped in a clean kitchen towel that smelled like home. We sat in my living room. Sunlight streaming through windows I'd cleaned that morning. Everything bright. Everything clear. I handed her the letter. Watched her face as she read. Saw surprise bloom into understanding. Understanding deepen into something like panic. Good panic. Overwhelmed panic. The kind that comes when someone sees their life changing in ways they never imagined. She tried to speak, couldn't find words, started crying instead. But they weren't tears of joy. They were tears of responsibility. Of understanding what had been placed in her hands. Of realizing that love this deep comes with obligations. I told her she didn't need to say anything. Didn't need to thank me. Didn't need to promise anything or prove anything. Just needed to keep being herself. Keep showing up. Keep being the kind of person who deserves good things. Keep being family. But I could see her processing everything. The weight of it. The responsibility. The fear that she might not be worthy. That she might disappoint me. Might fail to live up to what I'd given her. We sat in comfortable silence. Tea growing cold in our cups. Afternoon light shifting across familiar furniture. This house had seen so much. Birth and death. Joy and sorrow. Love given and love withheld. But it had never seen anything as pure as this moment. This recognition. This gift freely given to someone who'd earned it through kindness. Emily left that evening with promises to call. To visit. To let me know how she was processing everything. Not the money. Not the inheritance. Not the security it would bring her. The love. The trust. The faith I'd placed in her character. The belief that she was worthy of being chosen. After she left I walked through my quiet house. Really looked at it. Really saw it. 43 years of life contained in these rooms. Memories layered like paint on the walls. Stories embedded in every piece of furniture. Michael's reading chair, still positioned by the window where he'd sit with his evening paper. Still holding the shape of his body. Still waiting for his return. The boy's height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe. Gregory taller by 2 inches. Daniel catching up in spurts. Both of them racing to become men. Both of them forgetting to become good ones. Lillian's room, still furnished with her things. Her books on the nightstand. Her reading glasses in their case. Her presence lingering like perfume in fabric. All of it meaningful. All of it precious. All of it testimony to a life fully lived. Fully loved. Fully remembered. But I wasn't sad. Wasn't dwelling in the past. Wasn't mourning what was gone. I was celebrating what remained. What endured. What mattered. Love that had found its proper home. Trust that had been placed wisely. Family that had been chosen well. The phone rang. Emily. She'd read the letter 3 times. Wanted to make sure she understood correctly. Wanted to know if this was real. If I was certain. If there was anything she could do to deserve such generosity. I told her she'd already done it. Already earned it. Already proven herself worthy through 3 years of consistent kindness. Through showing up when others stayed away. Through caring when caring wasn't convenient. Through loving when love wasn't rewarded. Through being the family member I'd needed my sons to be. The person I'd hoped they would become. The daughter I'd raised them to be but they'd refused to become. She'd been all of that. Without being asked. Without being obligated. Without being related by blood. She'd chosen to be family. Had earned the right to be family. Had proven that family is made through action, not accident. I told her about my decision to include the disinheritance clause. About ensuring that greed would never triumph over love in my legacy. About protecting her inheritance from people who would contest it out of spite. Out of entitlement. Out of the mistaken belief that DNA trumps devotion. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made my heart sing. She said she hoped she'd never disappoint me. Never fail to live up to the trust I'd placed in her. Never forget what this gift meant or why it had been given. I told her that was impossible. She'd already shown me who she was. Already proven her character. Already earned my trust through years of consistent behavior. I wasn't worried about her future choices. Wasn't concerned about her worthiness. Wasn't afraid she'd change when money entered the equation. Because she'd had opportunities to take advantage all along. Opportunities to ask for help. To hint at needs. To position herself for gain. She'd never taken them. Never even noticed them. Because taking wasn't in her nature. Giving was. After we hung up, I made myself dinner. Simple food. Quiet meal. Peaceful evening. Outside my kitchen window the street was settling into dusk. Porch lights flickering on. Families gathering around dinner tables. Normal life. Ordinary life. The kind I'd missed during months of legal battles and family warfare. But that was over now. Finished. Behind me like winter giving way to spring. I had chosen my family. Had protected my legacy. Had ensured that love would outlast greed. That kindness would triumph over entitlement. That showing up would matter more than sharing DNA. I thought about Lillian. How proud she'd be. How right she'd been to trust me with her final wishes. How wise she'd been to choose love over obligation. I thought about Michael. How he'd smile to see Emily at our kitchen table. How he'd appreciate her gentle spirit. How he'd understand why I'd chosen her. How he'd be disappointed in our sons. But not surprised. Never surprised. He'd seen the signs long before I'd been willing to acknowledge them. I thought about my sons. Hoped they'd learn something from losing. Hoped they'd examine their choices. Their priorities. Their character. But I wasn't holding my breath. Some people learn from consequences. Others just blame them on someone else. My boys would probably blame me. For the rest of their lives. For choosing Emily over them. For rewarding kindness over kinship. For finally learning to say no to people who only knew how to take. That was fine. They chose money. I chose love. Emily would understand someday. When she was older. When she had children of her own. When she learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just enabling dressed up in prettier clothes. Real love requires courage. Requires choices. Requires saying no to some people so you can say yes to others. Requires knowing the difference between family and relatives. Between blood and bonds. Between what you owe and what you earn. I'd learned that lesson late. But not too late. Not too late to matter. Not too late to make a difference. Not too late to choose love over guilt. Not too late to choose wisdom over hope. Not too late to give my love to someone who would treasure it. Someone who had earned it. Someone who deserved it. Someone who would understand that being chosen is a responsibility as much as a privilege. Emily understood. Had always understood. Would always understand. That's why she'd been chosen. That's why she'd inherited everything. That's why she was family. Real family. Chosen family. Family that chose me back. Finally.